I have actually no formal training in any of the contemplative disciplines. However, ever since I was quite young, have been practicing yoga, practicing meditation, things like that in my daily life, although not daily implies every day, and certainly I don't get to do things every single day. To me, also, contemplative practice includes other aspects of my life that maybe aren't traditionally considered to be contemplative practices, including such things as exercise, where for me, going out and running is just as contemplative as meditating. I see people running inside buildings and treadmills, and I don't understand how they could possibly do that. I love to get out and to explore, and that's another aspect, is hiking and things like that. And then there's also my research on emotion. My research on emotion crosses between understanding and measuring, quantifying emotion, but also with a goal, or not but and also with a goal of looking at things like empathy. And the question of how these things come into my daily life is to try to explore empathy as much as I can, and bring that into daily practice. It's at a university environment, there's a lot of tension and stress. I liken it a lot to underfeeding mice, and watching to see what happens. Academia is a lot of that, and so bringing in an empathetic point of view, an understanding point of view, is what I try to do every day. Yes, I'm a vegetarian, and vegetarianism is something that came along when I was very young, and is something that started out with just a dislike of eating meat, and then it kind of grew from there to just a complete, I think the last time I had what I call things with eyes was when I was about 25, so about 25 years ago was the last time I had it. And what's funny about that is because I lived in Ireland for the past 5 years, and when I was over in Ireland I said, well, I don't eat anything with eyes, and they said, you don't eat potatoes? And I realized, okay, so I do eat something with eyes. But yeah, I think that vegetarianism for me is that element of empathy. And what's interesting to me is I had a college colleague from South Africa, and he and I would have long discussions of the philosophies of eating meat. And what was interesting about him is that he was a hunter and was very comfortable in that, and I loved that. I mean, I couldn't be a hunter myself, I couldn't do any of that, but I loved that he was mindful of eating meat and what that meant. So that was a kind of an interesting experience. In terms of empathy and how that comes into play in both research and interaction, in beginning to, the interesting thing is that music is a conversation, and music performers talk a lot about their audience and what it was like to perform that night, and the feeling they got from the audience. And audiences will talk about the feeling they got from the performer. And that incredible ebbing and flowing of empathetic relationship is what I like to establish in conversations daily. So a lot of my colleagues and students will complain about a collaborative situation. They'll talk about, this person, I actually just had some students last night in a team say, we can't get along with each other, and this is just horrible. And I really try to work with them to say, well, that's an interesting challenge. Just as important, and probably much more important than the actual project they're working on, is can they establish that collaborative relationship? Can they work together to understand where each one's coming from? And unbeknownst to the students, this is what employers are looking for as well, is that ability to work collaboratively and in teams. So I try to bring that together and work with faculty as well to say, these challenges we face collaborating are good challenges that we have to work through, and understanding what each other's perspective is a way towards getting through those challenges. I think in dealing with all of the communities that I deal with, mindfulness is a critical component of day-to-day life. And being mindful to me is paying attention to what's happening right in that moment. And so for me, dealing with or working with students is for them to explore what's happening right at that moment. If, again, working in collaborative teams, what is happening, what's the nature of what's happening in their team and the interaction. Sometimes people from the world of computer science and the world of cinema don't approach things exactly the same way. And so their ability to understand each other's approach, to pay attention to it, and to see how to take advantage of it and to explore it, and to make them a better person for exploring that, is, I think, one of the really most intriguing things that can come out of academics. It's true across the community of ICAT as well, the institute that I'm involved in. The community involves folks from industry. We had a meeting yesterday with a company that came in. It was challenging for everybody involved. There were 4 faculty and a company representative there. The company representative didn't know exactly what they wanted to achieve. They knew the end goal, but they didn't know how to get there, let me put it that way. And the faculty, as a lot of faculty are used to basically writing proposals and not having to sit there with essentially what is a reviewer and work with them to explore possibilities and to explore what will make that other person happy. We'll explore how we can get there, to have a dynamic conversation about aspirations and desires. And that's all about, again, talking about empathy, talking about mindfulness, being in the moment, looking at the nonverbal communication that's happening, being an audience and a performer simultaneously, and living that environment. I strongly believe that every individual is a community, that within each person you have different skill sets, that you argue with yourself constantly, you have different approaches to different things, and that's a challenge, just dealing with that. If you now have to do that with someone else, you deal with their own unique skills, whether it's cross-discipline, whether it's cross-personality type, whether it's completely different demographic backgrounds. It just creates what's impossible in you to be an impossible situation around you. And so you have to overcome the impossible by one step at a time, exploring them and you. So ICAT is an institute that brings together scientists, engineers, artists, and designers. And each one of those genres of exploration tends to draw in certain types of people, and those types of people have gone into those genres for a reason. And that makes it even the more difficult to sometimes deal with the relationship between an art project, a computer science project. One of the things that we don't have to deal with as individuals is that one part of your body and your mind can be at service to another, and that's okay. You won't yell at yourself about that. You'll yell at yourself for a lot of other things, but you won't yell at yourself for that. But if a cinematographer asks a computer scientist to just do that software thing, then it's one person at service of another. Or if a computer scientist says, oh, I just need a video made, make me a video, then the cinematographer is just at service and can't bring in their real skills and really grow. And if you can overcome that, and this is the real principle of the Institute, if you can overcome that and have a project that's at some unique moment in time has everybody contributing at full pistons, at full steam, then you are no longer acting as individuals. You're acting as a group together and doing what we call transdisciplinary work. We separate out very annoyingly in some ways the word transdisciplinary from multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. Transdisciplinary is about what I just described and about how you as an individual take that back into your life. And mindfulness is very much the same kind of thing. It's being present in the moment, looking to see what's happening, looking at the contributions of all involved, and taking that back into your own life and your own existence. And so that's how, in some ways, mindfulness completely overlays with the mission of the Institute. I went to a conference recently called Wisdom 2.0, which, as I've mentioned many times, I think is probably the most pompous name for a conference ever come into being. But Wisdom 2.0 was about mindfulness. And what was amazing to me there was to see the impact that mindfulness, contemplative practices have across everything. There were soldiers there that have just come back from serving overseas. There was a congressman, Congressman Ryan, who's going to be talking at the conference here, who was there talking about the importance of mindfulness in his life and in also with military and with specifically with PTSD. There were folks from startup companies, there were folks from academics, there were folks from big firms, all realizing how important mindfulness practice was in everything that a company, the military, every organization is about. Contemplative practice, to many, is something that's peripheral to what we do day to day, but in this conference we clearly saw that it was something that was integral to being a successful organization. So I think that bringing this conference to Virginia Tech is one of the most important things that's happened here, and I salute all that have been working really diligently in bringing this conference here. I hope that it's just not a one-off, but that it's people that go to the conference will see the importance of this at Virginia Tech. I hope, always hope, that a few people will attend the conference that are not the choir. Of course, most of the people that will go to this conference will be people that already incorporate contemplative practices in their daily life. But I'm just hoping that this conference will rub up against some of the rest of the establishment at Virginia Tech and have an influence there. I do think that it's important. I think it's important in how we operate Virginia Tech under an incredibly stressful organization, an organization that's incredibly fragmented, that tends to really focus on the individual rather than the group. So I think it's critical in its daily operation. I also think that it's a huge area of research, and we are a research university, and I think from every aspect and every point of view, contemplative practice is important. From medicine, which is the obvious first application, and there's funding from the NIH in alternative therapies and alternative practices, to looking at human-computer interaction, to almost every aspect of a discipline. There are research components. I was surprised, about 2 months ago, I sent out an email asking about people that are interested in research on emotion. And one of them that responded was this lady, Sue Duncan, from food science, who studies emotion and eating. And very much, while she wouldn't originally have said this has to do with contemplative practice, I think very much realizes that it does. That being there in the moment, being mindful of what's happening when you're eating is a critical aspect of what we do. And especially with some of the modern pathologies of the United States, of obesity, being very mindful of what's happening while you're eating. And to me, that's like, wow, could you ever have thought that, yes, mindfulness would be part of her daily life, but would you ever have thought that it would be part of her research? So to me, I think that it's an aspect that Virginia Tech is well suited to have, explore, and to incorporate into our daily lives and into our research and into education. And because I think there's also, by the mere existence of transdisciplinary institutes, I think there's an emphasis in Virginia Tech of exploring inter-individual relationships. And I think mindfulness and contemplative practices is an important element of that. I could reach for the stars and say that the Board of Visitors sometime had a discussion on this. I think that would be the most amazing outcome possible. But to be more realistic, I would say that it would be wonderful if these kinds of discussions would continue and become viral within the campus, within student organizations and students, and within faculty and within the administration. I think, well, I would love to see this conversation expand more broadly. I think this conversation is expanding nationally. And as I mentioned before, with conferences like Wisdom 2.0, it's hard, from different demographics to understand if you're struggling to make ends meet at the end of the day, how does contemplative practice come into your daily life? If you're struggling to have a successful company, how does that come into play? And I think conferences like Wisdom 2.0 and like what we're putting on here at Virginia Tech really show that there is broad reach to this work, that the contemplative practice, that mindfulness is an important aspect of everybody's lives, no matter where you come from and what you're doing. And so I think it's important for the region, and I think ICAT has a role in that, in bringing together folks of different disciplines, of doing outreach to the general public. We have internal projects that are dealing with mindfulness, and they're outreach kinds of projects. So I think one of the wonderful projects to mention, which it's probably already been discussed in some of your other interviews, is Itzo Bukvich's project on Tai Chi. It's a wonderful project that brings together medicine, computer science, the arts, and it's just such a wonderful example of a project that brings together disciplines. It's such a wonderful ICAT project and brings mindfulness into it as well. Contemplative practice to me and mindfulness is a slowly evolving thought process amongst individuals throughout the world. I don't see it as a fad, but I don't see it as what I would call mainstream either. It's something that I think has a wonderful, in my own opinion, of course, positive curve to it. In other words, it's expanding. I've talked a lot about the conference that I just came from, Wisdom 2.0, but I think it's a very important exemplar of what's happened. That conference started 3 years ago, so it's essentially brand new. The first year, I believe, and my numbers I'm sure are off, but it was on the order of 100 people. The second year, they were on the order of hundreds of people. This past year, there was about 1,500 people attending the conference. And again, is this a meeting of people that you would originally identify with this kind of practice, practitioners, teachers? And the answer is somewhat, but also amazingly, it was a collection of CFOs and COOs from companies, looking at, from Google, from Facebook, from I'm hard pressed to think of the other social media company. Twitter, thank you. Thank you to myself for actually pulling that out of the recesses of my mind. There were all of these other companies. There were lots of startups there. Startups, of course, that are interested in supplying products that will support mindfulness and meditative practices, but also startups that are interested in how they can incorporate this into their companies. And this is where I think it's starting to spread. Again, as I mentioned, there was wonderful conversations. There was a panel from 3 folks from the military. And one of them was a Navy SEAL and talked about how, of course, mindfulness was considered to be, it's not macho, it's this other thing. And now it is actually considered to be an important thing. A lot of them complained about the Veterans Administration, and as one always does, but that they specifically were just giving drugs for people that have difficulty dealing with that, and they found no benefit off of those drugs. But the minute they had brought meditation into their life, it had a profound effect on them. So these are areas that you wouldn't normally expect to see a mindfulness and meditative practice. So I think that this is happening, and it is spreading outside of what was considered to be the traditional community that would be interested in this. But I don't see this being widespread yet. I think that that's something that we need to work on and bring forward for all of us that believe it has a positive impact on daily life. To your question regarding this allusion to the word cult, mindfulness is a way of dealing with situations in your daily life. It has no bias towards any religious affiliation or any other thoughts of whether you're conservative or liberal, Republican or Democrat, poor or wealthy. It's just simply a way of dealing with your life and the challenges that we all face in our daily lives. So I don't think that anybody that even has a slight knowledge of what they're talking about thinks that it has any cult-like bearing. It's as important as talking about STEM and saying, oh, everybody needs to know science, technology, engineering, and math. Well, I suppose in some way you could think of that as a STEM cult, but really it's just about knowledge that we hope you gain, and we hope you gain, design, learning. We hope you have ways of looking at things from the technological point of view, from computer learning, from computational skills, to all of these other different approaches, and in that milieu of things, contemplative practice, I think, is an important element of reflection and being mindful of what you're doing. So it's just part of a mix. I think that for mindfulness to move forward, there has to be 2 things: an awareness of it and what it means. And I think that conferences like what we're putting on now at Virginia Tech help put that awareness there. Bad sentence, but basically to inform the public and the community in general of what's happening, what it means, and who's involved in it. I think that that's one way. And I think the second way is very much an interpersonal way, to see people living this in their daily lives. Frankly, you'll laugh, but I think having somebody like Sting doing contemplative practice probably has helped more than anything in terms of seeing somebody who has had this in their daily life, successful, and having some of the representatives from companies having this in their daily lives, especially at the upper level of management, but also throughout the company. I think it really is something that needs to spread virally that way. I don't think it's in any way can be told or dictated. It's very much about how one leads life. As I talked about before, all aspects of our life. Oh, you should love science. Well, you're not going to. You're going to love science if somebody gives you that experience that you enjoy. Anybody that tells you you're going to love science is just going to make you go the other direction if you're anything like me. And I think the same thing about contemplative practice. It's leading by example. Really seeing how, from a first-person point of view, it can benefit your life. I think that's really how it's going to spread. So I think both of those have to happen, and I think both are equally important. Awareness to kind of jump the bridge, and the interpersonal migration of it, if you will, it becoming viral.